Alright, in this video we are going to be reviewing what we did in Module 1 and learning about keyframes. So from Moodle, we will be doing all this. Alright, so how to create a keyframe first. Right now you see we can't have a keyframe because there's nothing on the timeline. So what I'm going to do as part of a review is create a new composition. I'm going to call it Module 2. I'm assuming that you already created a composition to start Module 2, so if you haven't, do that. The settings are the same as Module 1, just 10 seconds, and background color is irrelevant. So I've done that, and now I've created Module 2. If you haven't, press pause and go back and do that. Now what I'm going to do, down here, remember we have the tabs, this is the timeline, this is the main stage, these are your assets. So I'm going to close out of tab 2 here, and I'm going to drag Module 2 into Module 1. But you can't really tell that it's there because it's the same color as the background in Module 1. So I'm going to change the settings on Module 2 by double-clicking Module 2, going into it. So now I've reactivated the tab right here, Module 2. I'm going to press Control-K to activate the settings. I'm going to change the color. And now I'm going to close out of this tab to go back to Module 1. Okay. So you're probably wondering why, if when you're in Module 2 and you drag Module 2 into Module 1, why does it still show pink? Because we changed the background color to blue. It should be blue. Well, the background color of a composition is essentially a blank color. It's not really there. So maybe we are best suited to, that's the review portion of this module, so I'm going to delete from Module 1, Module 2, but I'm still leaving it in the Assets library. Now what I'm going to do is simply create a shape, and we're going to animate it. Okay, now you know the Shape tool. This is the fill, this is the stroke. You can increase the stroke, and you can change the fill simply by clicking on the color, changing it, and clicking OK. You can do the same thing with the color of the stroke. Okay, increase it. As you see right here, this is the anchor point for this shape. We need it to be in the center of this object. Otherwise, when we go to rotate, as you will see, it's going to rotate around the center of that anchor point, which always sets itself in the middle of the screen, which we don't want. But first, we need to change our cursor from the shape tool to the move tool, the selection tool, which is V. If we try to keep doing stuff with the cursor selected on the shape tool, we're going to continue to creating shapes, which we don't want. And you'll see that they pop up down here. So I'm going to press Control Z, Control Z. I'm going to choose the selection tool, which is V, or I can click here. And now I'm going to center the anchor point to this object, making sure that first I have this layer selected. Now Control Alt Home. Okay, now I'm going to collapse this arrow right here. We have a shape layer, just very standard. I want you to rename it by selecting the shape layer, pressing Enter, and I'm going to name it blue, whatever color it is. And now if you expand the options by clicking on this arrow here, you will see transform options right here. We have anchor point, which we can animate, which we are not going to do hardly ever. We have position, which is just the position of the object on the screen. Scale, which is the size, rotation, and opacity. So what we are going to do is we're going to animate position. So how do you create a position keyframe? First, we want to make sure that the scrubber, which is this blue line, is all the way to the left. Now, I'm going to click the stopwatch for position to activate it. And now we see on the timeline is a diamond. If you click on it, it turns blue. If you deselect it, it's light gray. That's called a keyframe. that holds in 2 bits of information. It tells time and then what type of keyframe it is. In this situation, position. So it's telling the computer that at 0 seconds, this shape is going to be at that position. So if I move the scrubber to a half a second or 15 frames, and I move the shape in the upper right hand corner of the screen, this keyframe here has 2 bits of information, time and position. It's telling the computer at a half a second or 15 frames, this object is here. So what the computer does between point A and point B is move the shape from point A to point B. So we've created 2 keyframes. Now what we're going to do is drag these apart to show you that you can move keyframes too, okay? So let's say when I'm doing this animation, I don't want the square to start moving right away. I want it to start moving at 15 frames. And it's going to go from 15 frames to 1 second. So now I'm going to click and drag these keyframes, and I'm going to just move them. They will maintain their distance from one another. So now if I were to press play, which is this button right here, or it's, let's see, is it enter or spacebar? Spacebar, okay, I always forget. And now the object doesn't start moving until 15 frames. Okay, and it takes a half a second or 15 frames at this point to reach point A to point B. So what I can do is expand the time or increase it by just simply moving this keyframe further away from point A, and now it's going to take twice as long. You can do the opposite as well. You can move the keyframe closer to the first keyframe, and now it's going to take a fraction of the time. It's going to be much quicker. Okay, and now we can copy and paste keyframes too. So what I'm going to do is copy this first keyframe and paste it over here after the second keyframe. So the shape is going to go from point A to point B and then back to point A. So I do that by first selecting the keyframe, pressing Control C for copy and Control V for paste. And I can continue to do that. I'm going to select, remember, point A, point B, point A. So if I wanted to go back to point B, I'm going to start here. Control C, Control V. So I want you to have this. 2, 3, 4, 5. So these 2, 4, 5 keyframes here. This is part of what you're going to show me. Alright, sticking with position and position only for the rest of this module, what I'm going to do now is show you how to delete keyframes. So this is point A, point B, point A, and B. I'm going to delete these 2 keyframes in the middle, so it's going to go from point A, B, A to B, and then back to A. So it's going to take a little bit longer to get to B, and then it's going to shoot back to A. Alright, now what I'm going to do is create what's called a hold keyframe. So if this object starts moving at 15 frames to 2 seconds, and it goes back to point A at 2 seconds and 15 frames, or 2.5 seconds, I want it to hold this position until 3 seconds, and then go back to point B at 3.5 seconds. So if I wanted to maintain A, we have point A, point B, and point A up until 3 seconds. From 2.5 seconds to 3 seconds, I want it to hold point A. So I'm just going to select A, Control C, Control V. So now from here to here, it's not going to do anything but maintain that position. And then at 3.5 seconds, I'm going to take point B and paste it. So when I press play, okay, that's a holding keyframe. Now how do you clear keyframes? you click this button right here. So go ahead and click this stopwatch and you'll see that everything you just did is erased, and now you're going to have to redo it to get credit for it, or press Control Z. Okay. So for the further directions, what I want you to do is create another shape underneath the shape that we just did together. And what you must do is make sure that you have nothing selected. If this is selected, click down here to deselect it. Otherwise, when you create a new shape, it's going to put it on this layer, and we don't want that for now. We'll get into that later. Okay, so this layer is deselected. I'm going to create another shape. Center the anchor point. And I want you to duplicate wow. Okay, this is new. You're able to copy and paste keyframes from one layer and apply them to another layer. That must have just changed, because in the past you couldn't do that. I was going to ask you to duplicate the movements of this shape to mimic this shape, but there's no need to do that because you simply can Control C and Control V. So there's no need to do that. So your lesson is over with. So save that, and that is all.